Hello, welcome to the From Way Downtown Pacers podcast. I'm Indy Star Pacers editor Nat Newell here with our Pacers insider Dustin Dopriak. We're going to obviously talk about tanking. Pacers were fined $100,000 for not playing Pascal Siakam and two other starters in the second game of a back-to-back on February. I should remember this. I typed it so many times. February 3rd, I believe. They lost the game. They did not play three of their top players because it was the second game of a back-to-back. This is not the first time the NBA. This is under the player
participation.
Say it again.
The player
participation policy, yes, which was created to combat load management, but they also are using it for tanking. So basically, they said because Pascal Siakam was healthy enough to play and did not play, that they got fined for it. There was a message, or there was a sentence in the original press release that said if they had divided up the three players sitting out, they might have avoided it. You have to assume the Pacers have talked to the NBA and figured out what that meant. The NBA has not shared exactly what that means. So I don't know. There's 100 different directions to go here, Dustin. Where do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think first off, I mean, it was interesting to me. Not interesting, not surprising to me to see the fan reaction. I mean, I think, part of it is just like, okay, like you're picking on my team, so I'm fighting back sort of thing. Because, I mean, there's been this, and you see a lot of it just through the debates in my Twitter mentions, more or less, or just on Twitter among, what you would consider sort of Pacers Twitter personalities, I guess, if you will, and how much and how little they should be tanking and everything. I mean, first off, I think just the fans were insulted, and I really got it. Like, I'm not surprised because you're looking at it and saying, okay, like, all right, the Indiana Pacers of all teams are going to be the ones that are going to get hit over this when they have, as a franchise, as an organization, they have avoided tanking almost entirely throughout the entirety of their existence. They have had plenty of seasons where they could have and instead chose to play it out or just put out the best team that they could. And for that reason, they haven't had a top 5 pick since 1988. I'm like, you go back to the Reagan administration when they picked Rick Smith second. They've never had a number 1 pick. In their time in the NBA. So they're like, oh, you're going to get us for this, the 1 year. And I think they're fair on that, considering, this, as we wrote, I think earlier this season, as I wrote earlier this season, they didn't try to take a gap year took them. They didn't. I think sincerely, had they had a healthy team, if they came in and they hadn't, I mean, not only do you lose Tyrese Halliburton, if it was just Halliburton, if it was just Halliburton getting his Achilles, I think they would have played through this. And I think they probably would be a play-in team or close to it. And I think they would have embraced that. I think they viewed it as you're better off maintaining the culture. It's important to maintain the culture of winning. It's important to keep guys in position, maintain that muscle memory of trying to win games, of postseason basketball if you can get there, and all of that stuff. And, they lose McConnell to a hamstring in preseason. They lose Nembhard to a shoulder in game 1. They lose Mathurin to a toe, a turf toe in game 2. And Obi Toppin comes out of game 3 with the stress fracture in his right foot. So, you lose 3 key guys there. And right as you're about to get, you get Nembhard back, you get McConnell back, and then Nesmith has an MCL sprain and he misses 6 weeks. And you finally get everybody back, and Johnny Furphy tears an ACL. And so it's just like, if you're the Pacers, you're like, all right, like, we didn't sign up for this. We didn't decide this is what we wanted. We didn't say, okay, well, Halliburton got hurt. This is a lost year. We would have pursued this, but we started 1-13, 2-16. Lost the first 9 games, I think it was. And by the time then they got a 13-game losing streak in the middle of that. And you could look back at that and say, okay, well, they should have played better in that stretch. There were games that they could have won with the roster they had, and I would agree, but they didn't. And so you come out of it and you're 15-40, or you're whatever they were 2 weeks ago. And they're like, okay, well, why shouldn't we give guys the second nights of back-to-backs off? Like, what is really the harm there if that's what we're doing? And that's all the real tanking that's going on is you had 4 games so far, second nights of back-to-backs, where they've given pretty much everybody off. And one of them, go back to the Golden State game, and they had nobody at that point. They just gave Pascal a break, and he probably needed it at the time. and gave Neesmith a break, and they went out and scored 83 points. Was the January 17th game when they scored 78 against Detroit necessary? I don't know. I mean, they played a bunch of games and whatever. I mean, that thing was just utterly brutal to watch. But, it stands out to me that you go from, that group of guys scoring 78 points in Detroit to that February, third game against the Jazz, they score 122. And they actually look like even with Siakam out, Neesmith out, Nembhard out, McConnell out, that was a competitive basketball game. And Utah was playing, more of their guys. There were a few that were sitting out, and they just made a trade that afternoon. So, they were down to like 8 guys, but I mean, they were able to, Pacers were able to keep that game competitive. Then they went out and they beat Brooklyn with that same group of people. So you're just like, okay, well, what are you really saying here? Like, you can't rest guys, because, and so if you're the Pacers fan, you're thinking, all right, so the 1 year that we get bad enough luck that we can justify just not going for it. You're telling us that we're going to get fined for that. What have we done to, draw your ire on this Adam Silver? And it seems to me certainly that what it was that, they saw Utah as the team that they had to hit. And then once they just decided by the parameters by which they were going to hit them, then they had to hit anybody else who was, operating under those same, who did something similar at all. And so obviously Utah got the bigger hit, but they couldn't just hit Utah. So they had to circle somebody else and say, okay, well, all right, well, I mean, sorry, Pacers, but you blatantly did hold out your all-star for a game that he didn't have to sit out. So, that's something that the bylaws say that we continue for. So we will. And, just because we have to do it to send the message. So if you're a Pacers fan and you're feeling pretty, picked on, I feel like you got some pretty good justification there to start with. I think the, and I don't know, I don't think, I think the other games they've lost honestly. I mean, there may have been some occasions where, they were down by 15 and maybe you could put, with 5 or 6 minutes to go. And if you really wanted to put the pedal to the metal, you could have, and cut it back to 6 or maybe possibly made it a game. But, where they might have pulled the plug a little bit earlier than they had to, but I don't know if that changes, the outcome ultimately. You're far back enough that you could conceivably justify it. It's a little early. It's not the most going for it hell or high water move that you could possibly do. But it's not flat out tanking either. It's deciding, it's waving the white flag, maybe a touch early, but in a game that you are probably going to lose. And that's sort of the most tanky stuff they've done. The games that they've just lost, I think they've just lost. I mean, it's certainly early in the season, they were running out rosters that didn't have a chance, since really Mathurin came back. I think the first time they've mostly been able to put out rosters that can compete. But that doesn't guarantee they were going to win. And they played some really close games. They beat some really good teams, Oklahoma City and the Knicks among them. But a lot of nights they don't have a ton of firepower out there. And it's Pascal trying to pick up everybody else. And, nights when Andrew Nembhard doesn't shoot it well, they're not a great basketball team. Nights when Aaron Neesmith doesn't shoot it well, they're not a great basketball team. They become very vulnerable in those cases. So, I don't think they've been cheating all year, and it does seem a little bit over the top to bang the Pacers of all people $100,000 for tanking when they historically have never done such a thing.
Yeah, a couple quick points of interest. Number one, they're 9-9 in their last 18 games. So going back to your point of if they had not had those early season injuries, is this a play-in team? Who knows what happens? But 9-9 in 18 games is not nothing. I mean, you got to think that perhaps they would have been.
If you give them Zubac, if you imagine, if you bring Zubac back, and certainly don't know, he played through the ankle. I don't know when he's going to feel healthy enough to start playing on the ankle again. But a good version of Zubac plus this group is good enough to get you in the play-in, over the course of 82.
And the other thing to note is that you referenced this, but Utah was fined $500,000. I think they held out their Markkanen and who else did they hold out there? The guy they traded for,
Jackson, Jackson's up here.
Jaren Jackson. Shameful. Shameful of me to not remember the Park Tudor star. They played the first 3 quarters, did not play the fourth, which I think is a more egregious version of this. And let's get to the point, which, I mean, there's a couple of sort of big picture things to address here. Number one, the Pacers' job, in my opinion, is to maximize how many games they can win over a long stretch of time. And when you have a lottery so that the worst teams have a better chance to get the first pick, finishing with a worse record plays into having a better record over a long stretch of time, period. Those are the rules the NBA has established. This has been a thing since the 80s when the lottery was created. I realize it's worse now than it probably has ever been, although there were some individual games that were pretty egregious even back in the 80s. So, and Adam Silver acknowledged this, that the league is incentivizing this in some ways. And if I'm a fan, I'm okay with it because tanking is the way to get better. Do you think there's an answer to this? I mean, we can talk about a couple of the obvious ones. We don't need to go too deep into this, but do you have an answer for solving, quote unquote, solving tanking?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing is that like you don't want to solve tanking and create a whole other problem,
which is what's going to happen.
You can solve tanking if you just want to solve tanking. So I think what it really gets at, and I think what spoke to me, and Mark Cuban just put out, he actually put it out 2 hours ago. I just saw it. That I thought was really interesting about what he feels like fans really want. And he talked about fan experience, which I think he put maybe too much on, but he was also saying that, like, what the fans really want is for their team to have a shot.
And hope.
And hope. And I thought that really spoke to something when I saw, I was on vacation this weekend, so I didn't dive into it that much. But, I saw the response from Silver about tanking, the kind of overall thought. And he did mention this, that, like, there are fans that want their teams to tank because it gives them a better shot at getting better. And I think it speaks to, I think, this conflict that is, like you're saying you want to serve the fans. And like he seemed to acknowledge that, like, the fans they have certain desires when they buy a ticket, and they have certain desires about what they want to see from the league, and they have certain desires about what they want to see from their team. And so they want all of these, and it's tough to serve kind of all those masters, if you will. And like, there is, you get kind of acknowledged within fans that fans want different things at different times, and fans want some things that are conflicting, and you can't have all of them. But I do think there is an override. I think that they want more than they want to be sort of rewarded for buying a ticket. Not rewarded, but like if you look at a ticket as a contract, and you say, okay, like, buying a ticket is guaranteeing you the opportunity to see these two teams at their best fight it out for this one game. Like that is what we are guaranteeing you by virtue of giving this ticket. If you're saying that that's what the contractual promise that you're making, and you need to stick to that, like, I get that. And I understand, like, fans, when they buy a ticket, feel that way, but they also absolutely, I think, are more emotionally invested. And this is my read of them, like, hey, like, I'm the guy that gets paid to cover this team. So, like obviously it's not my rooting interests or anything like that. Like, I get to, if I don't get to watch Nikola Jokic one night, I get to watch Steph Curry the next, you know what I mean? Like, so I'm still showing up either way. But, like, if you bought your one ticket to go see Steph and he doesn't play, then you feel like you got gypped, especially if you're taking your 10-year-old and that was his Christmas present. I get it. I've heard all these stories, but, like, they are also more emotionally invested in the idea of their team has a shot to win it. And Pacers fans certainly are still in that mindset of, we were this close. Our team was this close to celebrating a championship for the first time since it was in the ABA. Like, what gets us closest to that is one more player. You get Zubac plus one more player, and you got to feel good about your chances. I mean, like, there's no guarantee. The Knicks are still going to be good. The Pistons are still going to be good. The Celtics are going to get Tatum back, and they're going to be good. Like, you're going to have to fight all of them. And then you're going to have to go to the West, and you're going to have to deal with Oklahoma City or Houston or San Antonio. And, Wemby's going to take another step. You're not guaranteed to get it, but you do still feel like you get one more player and you're there. And that's still kind of your North Star. You're still like that, this feeling like what it felt like to watch this run, see something else like it, and go the distance. Like, that's what you're driving. And so you ultimately want competitive balance more.
Fans in general want their team to do what it takes to be successful long-term, more than to win a particular game in February, which I think is 100% accurate. To me, you got to me, I think there's two choices at this point if they don't want this, which I understand why they don't want it. Number one is you go back to the pure worst team gets the first pick, second worst gets the second pick. There are problems with that. The teams at the bottom, you could have a team or two, you could have more than one team trying to be awful from the beginning of the year. If teams are close at the end, they're going to do whatever they can to get ahead. But I think we're talking about a small number of teams in that situation. And I think you can address teams that are from the beginning trying to be awful. The other choice is to just not tie draft picks to records. I think I prefer the first option because I think there's bigger problems if you don't tie records to draft picks in some ways. But when you do the lottery, you're including more teams. You're giving more teams a chance to tank, number one. And number two, I don't care if the difference between if I'm running a team and I get a 5.1% chance of getting the first pick if I have the worst record and a 5% chance of getting the number one pick if I have the second worst record. I want the worst record. That's just how it works. So I just don't think the lottery is the solution. But and some people, the other choice would be all the teams that are not making the playoffs get equal shot. And then the problem with that is our team's trying to lose to get into the lottery and out of the play game. So again, that's probably my second choice. But so I would go with just straight on record and pick. What are your thoughts? Where do you think are there solutions to this?
Yeah, I mean, there's some. I think, like, I guess part of my view is that, like, I don't know how much I want to over incentivize the idea of saying that. I guess part of my concern with this whole thing is always feeling like, all right, you have to tell teams like how they're allowed to run themselves, and I think part of it that bothers me overall, and it goes back to the kind of the load management thing, is that like you are sometimes it's like, well, can't you just let people figure out what's best for them on some level? And I bring this part up. It's like we go on this idea that, like, okay, well, like everybody should be trying to play 82. Well, like, LeBron is the one who gets hit hardest for load management. It's not fair. I don't think he's the biggest violator, but he's played more minutes and more games than anybody. And like he takes his days off. You know what I mean? He takes his opportunity, especially now that he's 41. He's pretty unequivocal about, like, man, I'm not playing back-to-backs. Like, I'm 41, body can't handle it anymore. And he's still giving you, every time he goes out there, he's giving you 22, 8 and 6, 8 and 7, something like that. Like when you're getting him. So it's like, I don't know what to say about it. I think we can get too much in the weeds of saying, like, okay, well, you have to do it this way. Like you can't, like it's almost like, okay, like let teams follow the way they're going to follow and let them build the way they're going to build. And it's like the teams that have been built through tanking, or just being bad. I mean, like, is it bad that the Pistons are good? Again, is it bad that the Rockets are good? They had to be bad for a while, and now they have teams that are fun, like that are competitive as all get out every night. I mean, like they're through the nastiest teams you want to deal with because they were bad for a little while. I don't know that those cycles are horrible. I mean, as far as just saying, like, okay, like how are you going to incentivize this? Like, I think it's worse to incentivize teams that are on the edge to not try to make the playoff. Like, I think it's worse to incentivize getting, a team to say, I want a lottery ticket here, like, if the difference, but like, and this isn't the case every year, but like for the Wemby season, like if I think a lot of teams, if you were to say, do you want to be the 10 seed or do you want to have a lottery ticket? Like, I don't know that you do that this year, and this is a good draft. Like this is a really, really good draft. I don't know if you're, like on that edge between, 10 and 11 in your league, you're going to sit out, and you do get lottery tickets if you get beat in the play-in round. Or do you want to be, like, would you rather not get that last spot in the playoff? And would you rather have a lottery ticket just for any kind of hope to get a player like that? I think it's worse to incentivize teams that are on the edge. It's worse to incentivize them getting out of it than it is for teams that are already bad to not play well down the stretch. Like, I think that's a worse scenario. So that I think is I think key. I mean, flattening the odds I think has generally been good, at the end of the day. But I don't think there's a great way to do it, and I don't want to overdo it for, like when teams hit rock bottom, like I don't think it's a bad thing for let them to give 2-3 years where they can build a new team, because those teams are fun, like it's fun to watch Cade and Ossar play together, in Durant. Like that's a fun team, like, and it's just like, okay, like it would have been better off if like in one of those years they'd have gone out and won 30 games, like for who, for like what purpose? Like who's happy? Who would have been happier if, 2 seasons ago, Detroit would have won, 25 games instead, or 25 games instead of 17. Like, what's the difference?
Yeah, the Pistons fans will take what they have now with the several 4 years.
Yeah.
And now another key point here is that the teams need to be well run. So I mean, the Pistons changed management and things got better. So some of this is, the Sacramento Kings aren't tanking; they're just lousy. So, that's a plays a role too. There's just a lot of this that you just have to take. And this is a point that you were somewhat making, but to me, like if I'm the Pacers right now, resting Siakam on the second game of a back-to-back makes just sense. In that, why do I want to put Miles? The season's lost. Why am I putting Miles on? He's 31. He's not old, but he's older. A veteran who played a ton of minutes. Why don't I sit him out that game? It makes sense to sit him out and wait and save a little powder for next year, rather than every game he plays is a chance he gets hurt. So there's that aspect of this too that kind of rubs me the wrong way. And this is somewhat what you've been talking about as well. Okay, this time I'll come clean. It's not technical difficulties. Dustin is actually tanking the podcast. He's not showing up for certain aspects of it. So, but he's back now. I simply was making the point that it makes a lot of sense to rest Pascal Siakam in a season like this, in the second game of a back-to-back. He's an older guy. He's 31. He's not that old, but he's a veteran guy. Played a lot of minutes. And that kind of rubs me the wrong way for the league. And this is what you were referencing, basically, that why does the league need to tell Pascal Siakam when he needs to play and when he needs to rest within reason? And again, he's not sitting out the last 2 weeks of the season or something like that. He's sitting out 4 games all year.
And not only has Siakam played in 51 to 55 games, he scored in double figures in every single one of those. He scored 20 points, I think, at 40 out of 51. I think he's 24th in the league in minutes. So, it comes back, I think, to this idea that – and it feels like the NBA looks at it as we've made this promise that these guys are always going to be there, and therefore they always have to be there. It's because they're marketing the individuals. It's almost like you're feeling like, okay, well, if you go to see this traveling circus at any point in time, then anybody who could be there is going to be there. And I get the selling point there, I see where the league is coming from, but you also do have to consider that, these guys are running a marathon. I think that's one thing that we all often forget. I think, I heard Jay Williams say the other night on a college basketball game that the product is superior in college basketball right now because you're seeing everybody every night. And I get that. But ultimately, what's always stood out to me from covering the NBA versus covering college basketball is these guys are running a marathon. And college basketball is not the same. Like you're playing 35, 33, 34, 35 games, and you're playing twice a week, and you're never playing back-to-backs, and you don't even have just one day in between games until you get to the NCAA tournament. For most of the year, you have space to recover, and you're in your 20s. So, you're late teens, early 20s, and you can do that. These guys are sticking around and giving you, LeBron James is giving you 20-something years of doing this, and some other guys are giving you 10, deep into their 30s, and it's a different game. And I think it almost has to be acknowledged that this is a marathon. And more is being asked of these guys physically to keep up with the pace that's being played than ever has before. But even if it wasn't, it's still a slog. It's still a real slog. And so if you want these guys to be good over time and to continue to give you years and years and years of being good at this, you have to let them rest and recover. You have to acknowledge that they're humans. To use Rick Carlisle's phrasing, they're men, not machines. And there has to be some understanding of that and acquiescence of that. Like it's not a collection of robots, and I hope it never is. Given what we're talking about, like some of the things Adam Silver was talking about in AI, like you still want these to be humans. This is a point of watching these guys be human, and they have to be allowed to have human bodies, and allowed to recover and allowed to rest and stuff like that. And so, if you make it so that you feel like you have promised this guy's best every single night, that's almost an unfair contractual obligation to make. If you're also saying, the point is to win championships. It's hard for it to be both things, for it to be, try to reach the mountaintop and put together as long as a career as you have and give it absolutely everything and spill it every night. I mean, one guy that gets credit for doing that and playing 82 a lot of the years is Michael Jordan, and he retired 3 times. So, that's the thing that we kind of forget in the discussion of Jordan is he hit 3, he hit 3 walls, and one that he was finally the last one. But I mean, he hit a wall 3 times saying, okay, man, I got to take a break. And, that's what you see when you look back at The Last Dance, is him saying like, man, this is a lot, because he played every night and he spilled it every night. And that's great. He was incredible when he was playing. But, there's a reason why LeBron's passed him in all of these record things, because LeBron has, spaced it out in the later stages of his career to make sure that he's good for longer, as opposed to just flaming out really fast and giving it all you got all the time. There's something involved there in making sure these guys are shot. So, I mean, I think another thing would be just, let's have a real conversation about tanking and what is sane and what isn't. I don't think it's nuts to say, all right, second nights of back-to-backs, there's some leeway there, and acknowledge that, I mean, I don't know, charge less on second nights of back-to-backs for tickets. I don't think that's a crazy thing to do at all. I mean, if you're going to say, okay, like this, say like, okay, like there's going to be fair opportunity in there. If we're not going to penalize you for that, you can get penalized by losing the game. If you want to win the game, you play to win the game. But if that's not that important to you down the stretch, then, dial down the cost of games. If that's what you feel like you have to do to kind of even things out, and be fair to the fan base, and say, okay, some nights of these are going to be different. If we still have to do these, or the other option is, maneuver the season so you get rid of back-to-backs. If there's something to be said for that's, for a champion, that's a cauldron you have to go through. You can make that point if you want to, but you could say, okay, if the team is not contending, it can't be expected to be any good in, the second nights of back-to-backs toward the end of the year. I mean, you can do something like that and say, okay, well, there's going to be this is fair, allowance here, and this isn't. And, it just doesn't strike me as it's fair to say, okay, every single, every single player who's an all-star has to play out the string no matter how bad his team is. It has to give you, like he cannot take a night off on the second night of a back-to-back. Even if he's played every year, even if he's past the qualifying point as far as the 65 game rule, he's still got to give you everything in the middle of March when your team is playoff eliminated. That's a requirement, because this is what we've promised our fans. I mean, that seems like it doesn't, it goes beyond to the point of just saying, all right, we're not really interested in whether you're long-term successful. We feel like we've made a contractual obligation. You're obligated to meet it.
Let's wrap up with what's next for the Pacers. I mean, it seems like there's the NBA is offering some advice on how many starters to sit or whatever in that initial press release. It's 1:15 right now. You'll talk to Rick Carlisle at 5:00 today on Tuesday as the Pacers practice for the first time since post All-Star break. With Zubats, I got to think is going to have to play based on the way this is going. And then the Pacers, of course, have the protections on that pick for this year. If it lands 5 through 9, it goes to the Clippers. What are we going to see? What do you think we're going to see from the Pacers the rest of the way?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there are some. I think the Pacers might be willing, if this is how it's going to be. They might be willing to pay a few more fines. I'll be interested to see how Rick reacts to it. They don't have another back-to-back until March 12th and 13th. They play the Suns and the Knicks. So that would be kind of the next opportunity that you would see for them to, actually, no, they have a back-to-back right out of the gate. Who am I kidding? But they play the 19th and 20th. So I don't think They play Thursday and
play
Friday.
Washington. I don't think that counts.
Yeah, exactly. Those aren't real games. But no, I don't think they'll sit everybody the second night of a back-to-back right out of the All-Star break. Given this, they might have been willing to do that before. I don't think they'll do it now. But yeah, the March 12th and 13th is another back-to-back. And then they have, let me see if they even have another one after that. 9th and 10th in April. So I wouldn't be surprised if those two back-to-backs, they still sit guys. I would be surprised if they do it overall. Now, they might if Pascal has anything, if he stubs a toe, he is going to be on the injury report, and they'll probably look into that down the stretch, not now. I think they want to make sure he gets his 65 and gets to make an all-NBA case. And doesn't get held back from that. Siakam's a guy that's played all the time. I mean, I don't think he wants to play less than 70. But it might be more decisions made within games and trying to skirt that as much as you can. But I could say if you're the Pacers, that you have an argument to make that, like, look, this is actually making my team better. Like, Cam Jones is getting to be a better player because he's getting opportunity. Jarris Walker hasn't been benched. I think Jarris, except for the other night, the only night he's been out all year was the other night when he was sick, before the night against the Knicks. I can't remember if he played Wednesday or not, but I think he did play Wednesday. So
yeah, he's missed one game. Huff's missed none. Walker's missed one.
Right. So, like, Jarris Walker's a better player because he's had this opportunity. Cam Jones is going to be a better player because he had this opportunity. Furphy was becoming a better player because he had the opportunity before, he tore his ACL. So, they're going to make a case that, all right, like, I got to be allowed to develop guys, particularly when they get playoff eliminated. I think, when they're officially out, when they get to, say, 47, 48 losses, then I think they'll be able to point to and say, like, you can't expect this. You can't demand this. That we have to make everybody play out the string once we're playoff eliminated. Like, how does that make any sense? I've got to be allowed to develop my guys. I've got to acknowledge that this season's over. Any other team in any other league is allowed to do that. Like, once you're done, once there's no way you can get in the postseason, you are allowed to go develop your young guys and let them play. And so I think, I don't know, I'm sure they'll still do that. But on the broader point, I do think if it's being demanded anyway, I think you will see more of Ivica Zubac that you might have otherwise. Because I think there's value there. I think there's value in the idea of getting him out with Pascal Siakam, of getting him out with Andrew Nembhard, of Aaron Nesmith, starting to create some level of chemistry. I don't think they were going to sit him already the whole year. They're probably being over the top safe with this thing more than they have to be. I think they are probably overplaying it for how much of an issue it is. But it's real. It's certainly a thing that happened. I mean, he did have a real ankle sprain. And so I do think that if you're going to be demanded to do it, you might as well get something out of it. And so I think there is value in getting Ivica Zubac on a court in a Pacers uniform. I think it made sense for him to run around with Aaron Nesmith, run around with Andrew Nembhard, run pick and roll with him and with Nembhard and Siakam, get a sense of how they operate, get a sense of how they move, because that's ultimately going to be really important, because that's what makes this Pacers thing jive, is if, these guys understanding where everybody goes and being able to understand that without there being a play called, know where everybody likes to be and how everybody naturally moves. So, where they're going to be so you can keep the ball moving. And there's value, I think, to be had for getting Zubac out there in that kind of scenario. And, I do think there are still some more wins for them to get. I don't think they should zero out the rest of the way. I do think the win against the Thunder was valuable. The win against the Knicks was valuable. I think it still is good for these guys to maintain winning muscle memory and, winning feeling, and remind themselves what that's like. I think, this stretch is not bad for them. I don't think it would have been good for them to go 5-77. They needed some feeling of success this season, because again, what's different about this group is you're not thinking about tanking to get the guy that allows you to start over. You are tanking to get the last piece. You know, like that's the purpose of this, is like you believe you have a championship team, but like making sure that you have a championship team still reminds you still need your guys to remember how to operate at a championship level. And even if you're not going to be able to do that all year, you need to be able to do it in spurts, just so it's not a distant memory anymore.
All right, we will wrap it up there. Dustin will have more tonight. Again, Pacers play at 5 o'clock. Come to IndyStar.com later tonight and tomorrow, rest of the week for more. Thank you very much for watching and or listening.